All right, so you're probably wondering what happened. Well, I record these videos on my iPhone, which you probably know, and the phone rang, and it killed my video at that point. So let's pick up with where we were. So this wood, it is when it burns. I was talking about justice and wormwood or bitterness. When it burns, it creates this really awful smell. And that's the picture. So that which is to be sweet, which is to be affirming, that which is to speak life, brings this kind of odor of death with it. And that's the way justice is happening in Israel at this particular time. So that's the way chapter 5 sets up. Now, fast forward over to verse 24, Amos kind of bookends this chapter, or this section of this chapter, with this is what your justice is. Your thirst for justice is not really justice, it's bitterness, it's wormwood. Older translations will use wormwood. But in the last not the last 3 or 4 verses, but the last 3 or 4 verses we're going to deal with, 21 to 24, Amos says, I hate your feasts, speaking for Yahweh. These are feasts that Yahweh has actually instituted, right, in the law. He says, I hate them. Why is that? Because they've turned into something that they weren't intended to be. But, verse 24, and this is a really well-known verse from the book of Amos, let justice roll down like waters. All right, so and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Now, ever-flowing stream, in the Middle East, you have a lot of these wadis, and in rainy season, the wadi will fill up with water, or it'll be like runoff ditches, and it'll water the land. But most of the year, it's absolutely dry. An ever-flowing stream, or these waters rolling down from the mountains, it's constant refreshing, constant water. Ezekiel uses some of the same kind of language, actually, talking about the river flowing out from the house of God in Ezekiel 48. And it gives life wherever the river goes. Life comes along with it. I think it's kind of the same thing. But Amos's cry here is, okay, you've turned justice to wormwood. Rather, though, in repentance, let justice roll down like waters. Deal with one another equitably, and let righteousness, that is that kind of covenantal relationship with one another, be affirming in such a way that it's like an ever-flowing stream. Now, why does Amos need to say these things? Well, he unpacks that justice to wormwood idea in a couple of other passages in Amos 5. In verses 11 and 12, he talks about how the rich, and Amos is really kind of definite about the rich-poor divide. And he talks about how the rich trample on the poor. They trample on their rights. They trample on them as people. They push aside the righteous. They keep them marginalized. That's our language for today, marginalization. That's not the same language that you find in the Bible, but it's the same kind of idea that you find in the Bible. And then in verse 15, Amos has this nice little, in some ways it's like an Isaianic kind of appeal. Hate evil, love good. Hate evil, love good. And in doing that, what is there a specific that we might look for Amos to give us? And yes, there is. And he says, establish justice in the gate. Now, what's he talking about there? It's the gate where the court happened, the gate of the city. So you'd have the elders or the wise or the judges that would sit at the gate of the city. People would plead their cases, and then they would make decisions. So what is Amos saying? He says, he's saying, rectify the problem with your court system. Your court system is such that the poor don't get the justice that they deserve. Fix that. And how do you fix it? You fix it by hating evil and loving good. Remember the language that we had about bribery in Deuteronomy 16. This is just a way of walking that out. Amos is giving a very practical example. And then what happens as a result? Well, now in verse 24, going back to that, it lets righteousness and justice flow down like waters. So the focus is no longer on a religious kind of obedience to form and formality in Amos chapter 5, verses 21 to 23, where the writer says, speaking for God, I hate your feast and your processions and your form of religion. He says, I'm not interested in the form as much as I am in the content. And the content is justice, peace, wholeness for everyone, and equity. So those are some thoughts about Amos. And I hope that as you listen to these videos, you're seeing ways in which your own practice area can be impacted by these theological ideas. Theology, in my view, really is to be practical. Certainly we have conversations about things like the Trinity, which is a pretty difficult topic to get into, and we have conversations about the nature of God, as a result of that. We have some of those esoteric conversations, but most of the time, for me, when I think about theology, it's rubber hitting the road. How does this play out in the lives of folks who get up every morning, go to work, want to love their families, take care of their kids, and be good citizens? What does that look like? How does theology help them to do that? So that's my goal. All right, so we'll come back and we'll talk about Micah chapter 6, verse 8 in just a minute.